Good evening, and I'd like to call to order the October 24th, 2022 meeting of the East Bend School District Board of School Directors. Would you please all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Well, I'm pleased to begin the meeting with some student recognition, specifically our 2023 National Merit Scholarship commended students, and I believe Dr. Campbell is here to introduce.
Yes, and Mrs. Gariello is here this evening as well. We are incredibly excited that we're able to honor some outstanding Emmaus High School students, specifically those who are identified as commended students through the National Merit Scholarship Program. So I'm just going to give a little bit of background on the program so that our audience all has an understanding of really the magnitude of this particular honor. The National Merit Scholarship Program is an academic competition for recognition and scholarship that has been in existence since 1955. High school juniors entered into the 2023 National Merit Scholarship Program when they took the PSAT several years ago. That serves as an initial screening for program entrance. In addition to the National Merit semifinalists, the National Merit Scholarship Program also recognizes 34,000 commended students from across the country. These students received letters of commendation in recognition of their outstanding academic promise. The commended students are eligible for special scholarships that will be provided by corporate and business sponsors. And again, we're thrilled to be able to honor our commended students this evening. And so I'm going to join Mrs. Gariello over at the podium, and we will recognize them individually. And before they come up, I also want to recognize that certainly we're very appreciative of our students being here this evening to be recognized, as well as their families. We sincerely appreciate that for your students to have performed so well, not through this competition, but also throughout their high school career, really does take a tremendous amount of support and encouragement from all of you at home. And so we really do appreciate your partnership in education. Okay, we'd like to congratulate Ryan Bolris. And if you're here, we'll probably do a photo op if you don't mind. Lauren Kirschner. Julia McDonald. Eric Welp. And Mrs. Gariello.
That's okay.
That's okay.
Congratulations.
Megan Wilkes. That's good practice for when you get your diploma later this year. And also unable to be here this evening, but we'd also like to congratulate Adam Plotka.
So thank you, Dr. Campbell and Ms. Gariello. On behalf of the board, I'd again like to congratulate this fine group of students and truly recognize what a great achievement that they have. And obviously, best wishes for the school year and on all your future endeavors, as they say. Our next item is the EHS Student Government Association report. Dr. Campbell, would you like to introduce?
Again, we're so very happy to have our students here joining us this evening. There are certainly familiar faces when we look out to our SGA school board representatives, specifically Maggie Machulski is rejoining us again. She has been our school board liaison from the Student Government Association last year and is continuing her leadership role this year. Maggie continues to be an active member of Emmaus High School, serving on the school theater department. She's participated in many musicals and plays over the past several years, highly involved as well in our high school choral program. She is chorale secretary, and she's an active member of a cappella and the select choir. Maggie also serves as Hornet Ambassador and is a member of the Activism Club. Following high school, she plans to attend college. She'll keep us updated of her potential schools. And she's interested in pursuing a degree in public relations. So what a great opportunity for you to serve as the SGA school board representative. Also, we're thrilled to have Maggie Hess, who's joining us as an SGA school board representative as well. She works as an assistant floor manager at a local bookstore and provides tutoring services outside of school in all subjects. Depending on the season, she is actively involved in local political campaigns. In school, she participates in student government, the Stinger, Young Democrats, Hornet Ambassadors, French Club, mock trial competition, National Honor Society, and Students Organizing Against Racism, and somehow she has time to join us as our board representative as well. While she no longer plays in one of our team sports at the high school, she loves to run long distances and weightlift. She's an avid reader, coffee drinker, we share that in common, and an overly organized note taker. She has a passion for history and the French language, and hopes to one day become a professor of French and Francophone studies. And so again, we are thrilled to have you both join us and look forward to your contributions to our board meetings. And at this point, I believe we'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you so much. So to start with some athletic achievements from our students this year, right off the bat, tennis, which has now finished their season, but we'd like to specifically congratulate Shelby Carter and Kate Smith, who finished third as district doubles this year. Moving on to soccer, unfortunately, both our boys and girls team lost in the EPCs. However, they are both now attending districts. Field hockey, per usual, has gone undefeated. They are entering their 34th consecutive district run, and they did win EPCs against Nazareth. Our football team is currently the second best in the EPCs. They do play Parkland at 7 o'clock this Friday at home. Our cross-country team, specifically the girls, has won EPCs. They are unbeaten this year. Our boys got third. Both of them are now entering districts. And the same goes for volleyball. They unfortunately lost in the EPCs, but they are headed to districts now. Now moving on to some SGA events that have taken place in the last month, and I'd like to give a quick update on. Our tailgate went well. We had the highest turnout we've ever had with over 30 clubs. It was wonderful, and we love to see so much club participation. We hope this continues. A similar trend happened with homecoming. While freezing, it was a great success. We did have a higher turnout than ever before, a pro to having it on the football field regardless of the cold. We would like to extend from all of the students at EHS a special thank you to Mrs. Gariello, our new principal, for one of her ideas of the homecoming door decorating contest that involved all of our homerooms. As trivial as it might first sound, it has really helped shape the community that we have. Students won titles, including most heartwarming and most elaborate doors. It was just fun. Additionally, our pep rally went great. We actually had some teacher involvement this year, which was a wonderful new addition, including tug-of-war contests and balloon popping races. We hope to continue. And one other thing, we would like to recognize the Field Study Program, which is a relatively new program for Emmaus High School, and it is running for 11th and 12th graders. It's definitely becoming more well-known. It currently serves 27 students and is helping them find internships in their fields of study. We've noticed a large uptick in the interest in this program, and we're hoping to see it continue in the future years.
Yes, thank you, Maddie, our very own homecoming queen. Good evening. It's great seeing all of you again this year. So this year, Maddie and I look forward to getting input from all of Emmaus High School's amazing clubs to report back to all of you. A monthly survey will be soon sent out to each club so we can best represent them at this year's school board meetings. We want to get more specific information to share with you all, and we really want the clubs to give us input so we can best represent them. For now, we would like to recognize National Honor Society. Emmaus's chapter of National Honor Society recently welcomed in its newest members on October 13th, so congratulations to all who were inducted. National Honor Society has recently put together a new tutoring program as well that will be put into motion in the coming weeks. Foreign Cultures Club has been renamed World Cultures Club. The Chess Club recently became an affiliate with the United States Chess Federation and is now eligible to hold tournaments under the foundation. Their first will be held on October 29th. This week is Red Ribbon Week. The Kid to Kid Club is hosting a Spirit Week to bring awareness to drug and violence protection. This year's Red Ribbon Week consists of Pastel Day on Tuesday, PJ Day on Wednesday, Sports Day on Thursday, and Green Day on Friday. The Emmaus Theater Department has been rehearsing for their fall play, Almost Maine, and tickets are currently on sale on the EHS website and can also be purchased at the door. The play will be running on November 3rd through November 5th at Emmaus's Auditorium. Thank you, and we look forward to a great year.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any questions for our SGA representatives? Well, again, on behalf of the board, welcome back, Ms. Michalski, and welcome, Ms. Hess. We're very fortunate to have you, and I've been looking forward to having student representation back in these meetings all summer. So thank you for your service, and as usual, you are more than welcome to stay for as much as the meeting as you would like. But if you have other endeavors that you would like to pursue this evening, you are free to leave. So,
If possible, we would like to elect to stay for the rest of the board meetings.
absolutely. I appreciate having you here. Okay, our next item on the agenda are requests to address the board. And as custom, I'm going to read the following statement in preparation. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with public comment, speakers should feel free to express their opinion, comment, or question, and understand that this is not an interactive engagement with the board or the administration. Please direct your comments to the chair, be respectful, do not engage in profane rhetoric, and be mindful that others, including students, may be listening. I'd request that you consider that protocol when making your comments. For the members of the audience, please also be respectful and refrain from speaking during the public comment period. With that, I will now announce each speaker and their topic. When you step up to the podium, again, state your name, and you'll have 3 minutes within which to speak. Tonight, we have 4 requesters. Our first requester is Ms. Elizabeth Adesanya to talk about students organizing against racism.
Good evening. My name is Elizabeth Adesanya. We come before you to share a couple of experiences that have molded us, but also made us realize that there are faults in our public school system and how we handled racist and biased encounters. Students Organized Against Racism asks that the East Penn School District establish a clear, explicit, publicized system to remove faculty members who have a history of public racism and bias. Students are encountering racists at young ages. We have to think about how these are molding the minds of our youth. Not only is it giving white children the impression that this is how the world operates, but it's also causing identity issues in young Black children. There are more and more children who no longer want to wear their race proudly. When I was in 4th grade, I had an incident on the bus. There were some white children who were on the bus being loud, and our bus driver decided it would be a good idea to say over the speakerphone, "Quiet down. Do you not see the Black kids in the back of the bus being quiet? You should know better. You're supposed to be smarter than them. It seems they have learned from their past." I'm not sure if he was trying to be sly and thought that we wouldn't see his historical repulsive reference to Rosa Parks, but we did. I remember being very heartbroken and upset. He was not only giving white children the wrong impression of black children, but his statement screams white supremacy. He is trying to convey that white people should overall act better and be smarter than people of color. I have not forgotten, and if you ask the other black children on that bus, they have not forgotten. We took action and reported him. You would think that that would be enough, but no apology was given to the people on that bus, not even to acknowledge that it was wrong, but also to mend some of the damage he caused those children. We had to see the man who belittled the black race every day. Now to address the board. What do you do with that information? What are your plans to help children who are constantly face to face with adults who are making them doubt their abilities and their identity? How are you disciplining faculty and staff with multiple offenses reported? It is very easy to say, yes, there is a problem. A quote by James Baldwin says, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Adesanya. Our next speaker is Ms. Kayla Gonzalez, also speaking on Students Against Organizing Racism.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Kayla Gonzalez, and I'm an 11th grader here at Emmaus High School. As Elizabeth said earlier, staff at Emmaus High School that have been known for having a racial or biased history here at Emmaus High School are not being properly disciplined. In the beginning of the school year, I had an encounter with a teacher that led me to feel embarrassed and uncomfortable in this very school environment. This teacher had been known to have a bias for years, but I gave them a benefit of the doubt. I left the school feeling humiliated as the teacher yelled at me for giving my opinion on a presentation based on a sensitive topic that I was instructed to do so. I informed another teacher about it and was sent to the principal to talk to them, but was never told face-to-face if that very teacher was talked to. I'd like to give a thanks to the principal, though, for hearing me out. 2 weeks later, after the first incident, that teacher called BLM protesters animals because they were so-called reckless for looting and vandalizing in front of a whole class of students, including people of color. What they failed to mention was the actual meaning of the protest, as well as not every single protest was like that. As of last week, I was told by a friend that the situation was handled. What I can't seem to comprehend is the fact that I was never told personally, even though it was my situation, and I was the one that was left feeling humiliated. What I also can't comprehend is the fact that the teacher decided to call peaceful protesters animals in front of a bunch of students on a case learning about ethics. In addition, I also mentioned how that teacher has certain media on their laptop which can make students feel uncomfortable. To this very day, those images are still on that laptop, and many students have expressed in the past that they have felt uncomfortable in their classroom as well. I believe that the school board needs to take immediate action, a more immediate approach on this because no student or students should ever feel uncomfortable in a classroom as they come here to learn. But my experience isn't the only experience that happens here at Emmaus High School, and it is home to over 2,541 students. As students, we are told we are the future, and we should learn from our elders. But what I've learned is that expressing yourself will only leave you humiliated, and the ones that you should trust to help you and protect you will not be there, as this teacher is still there, and there are many like them at East Penn School District schools. I can only hope this changes as new students arrive, and they won't have to experience things like this. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Gonzalez. Our next speaker is Ms. Braciana Ford. Hopefully I said that correctly. Also speaking on Students Organizing Against Racism.
Okay, good evening. My name is Braciana Ford. During my 7 years of being in the East Penn School District from 6th to currently 11th grade, I have encountered more racist situations than I can account for. Over the years, I have learned and taught myself how to perceive those encounters, but many in the past have gone unnoticed by myself and others due to the lack of knowledge. During my first in-person year of high school, which was 10th grade, I was constantly followed and harassed by hall monitors on a daily basis. It took me a while to realize that due to the color of my skin and the people I hung around, my black friends, I was not trustworthy to the hall monitors as to where I was going or where I belonged when I walked the halls throughout the school day. Once, I was even followed all the way to my classroom door, simply because I walked away when I realized, even when I was telling the truth, they wouldn't believe me, since they already had their minds made up about who I was and what I do. I put it past me and concluded that it was, quote unquote, just a student matter that had nothing to do with race, to try and de escalate the issue. But when I think and remember, in 6th grade, when a white individual on my school bus referred to me as the N word, and when I reported the encounter, nothing was done about it. And even if something was done about it, it would just be categorized as a bullying situation. It made me realize more than ever that my standards for teachers, staff, and administrators were too high, that racism could and does exist within our school and the school district, that even when it is in front of our students and teachers and staff overall faces, that something in our school is racist, it is always excused as something else, like bullying or another student and staff issue. This results in nothing other than an impression of ignorance. I hope this helps you see my perspective as a Black student attending a predominantly white school and can help you understand why racism and ignorance towards racism in our school is completely intolerable. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Ford. Our last requester tonight is Ms. Amarachi Nadamele. Did I get that? Also speaking tonight about students and organizing against racism.
Good evening, parents, students, and school board members. My name is Amarachi Nadamele, and I'm here on behalf of students organizing against racism at Emmaus High School. Since this club has begun, the school district has made multiple policy improvements to alleviate the underlying systemic, racial, and prejudicial conflicts that affect learning and community within schools. However, as we progress through these issues, there is still more work to be done. Faculty and staff are an undeniably important factor in the learning system. Their dedication to and passion for building student minds are two admirable and inspiring qualities that make them such a valuable part of our schools. They're in a unique position to influence young minds, as the words they speak hold potential to form positive relationships with students and create an atmosphere for inclusion and acceptance in the classroom. However, their verbal interactions with students also have the power to foster a place for hatred, hostility, and vituperation within the classroom. With such power, teachers have a choice to make with their diction. Should the outcome of said choice result in a climate of hateful speech and vitriol, and is reported by a student to another staff member or a staff member of higher authority, it is the responsibility of the school administration to take action. Too many cases, as we've seen, of faculty and staff making racially biased comments and remarks towards students have gone unnoticed and without consequences. To ensure that schools are a proper learning environment for all students, it is imperative that such comments and interactions are relinquished. If the district considers education as a priority for schools, then it is essential that the educators in the system are conscious of the unconscious biases that reside within them. If a student experiences an interaction with a faculty member they feel is prejudiced or racially biased, they should be able to have a designated way to report their experience and be able to rely on a fixed system that will thoughtfully and thoroughly deal with the incident. In order to preserve the standards set for the student's quality of learning, it is necessary for the school district to establish a clear, explicit, publicized system to penalize and even terminate faculty members who have a history of public racism and bias. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate your comments. Our next item on the agenda are the minutes. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Are there any questions or comments on the October 10th minutes? Seeing none, Ms. Allen, will you please call the roll?
Mrs. Bowen?
Aye.
Ms. Bowman?
Aye.
Mr. Byrd?
Aye.
Mr. Champagne?
Aye.
Mr. Falegi?
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Dr. Whitney?
Aye.
Dr. Levinson?
Aye.
9 ayes.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. Next item on the agenda is the district update from Dr. Campbell.
Yes, I will say I see that our 4 student speakers have already left, but I did just want to take a moment to thank them for coming out in a public meeting and sharing their perspectives with us. Certainly, I can appreciate that it's not always an easy thing to do in terms of coming to a public meeting and sharing those perspectives. I do appreciate and care very deeply, we all do, about their voice, their experiences. And I do appreciate them recognizing as well that the district has taken steps with regard to our work with DEI. Actually, several of those students were very appreciative of their leadership, not just with students organizing against racism and the Black Student Union, but they've actually been a part of our work with equity, diversity, and inclusion, and are part of the student groups with whom members of both our principal team as well as our Office of Teaching and Learning meet regularly so that we can understand students' experiences and work to create more equitable, a sense of belonging among all of our school communities. So I did just want to express my appreciation to them for coming out. I also have several students from Emmaus High School who I'd also like to commend this evening. In particular, Griffin Lake is an individual who our board members, certainly that name will ring a bell. Griffin is an Emmaus High School senior, and he has been the PA State Individual Rifle Champion for the 2021 as well as the 21-22 school years. Just recently, we learned that Griffin participated in the World Shooting Championships that were held in Cairo, Egypt, about a week and a half ago, and he represented the United States in the junior men's division rifle event, and he placed 3rd in the world, first on the USA team in the junior men's 3-position event, and has a goal to someday compete at the Olympic level. And I'm confident to say that if anyone can do it, I think he probably can, and we're certainly looking forward to his senior year here as a student at Emmaus. I'd also like to reiterate what Maggie has already pointed out. I wanted to congratulate our homecoming queen and kings. Maddie Hess was our queen, and Aiden Garrett and Ian Forst were named as the 2022 EHS homecoming kings. I'd also like to point out that based on feedback from teachers, students, community members, and also our school board meeting discussions, the district has made some revisions to our flexible instructional day planned for the 22-23 school year, affectionately known as FID days. Those are the days on which, rather than calling a traditional snow day, we might have an FID day in which there are work expectations for students on those days. And so we've provided families with a detailed update of what our FID days will look like in the future, and we encourage families to check out the information on our district website. I'd also like to congratulate the newest inductees to the District 11 Hall of Fame. Last weekend, Becky George, our athletic director, and I were honored to be in the company of the newest inductees representing East Penn, Gwen Armitage and Debbie Chrisman. Gwen was a former East Penn teacher, coach, and administrator. And in 1974, she became athletic director in East Penn and was the first female athletic director in Pennsylvania. In addition, she held several leadership positions in District 11, serving as the president of PASDA. In addition, Debbie Chrisman was a student athlete at Emmaus High School in the late 1970s and certainly worked closely with Gwen. Debbie excelled in field hockey, basketball. She had a high school career point of 2,285 points. And I learned at the meeting that was actually before they had a 3-point shot. And so that's pretty amazing for a high school athlete. And she was also a state medalist in several events at track. So it was a great evening to celebrate inductees from East Penn into the District 11 Hall of Fame. Finally, the month of October holds a lot of excitement for everyone, perhaps some of our kids included. Our Emmaus High School choirs will be sponsoring a trunk or treat scheduled for this Thursday, October 27th. It will be held in the evening or after school in the high school parking lot, the senior lot, which is across the street. It's open to the public for a $5 entry fee, and we encourage community members to check out the details on our high school website. I also want to point out that later this week, LCTI is hosting its annual open house for prospective high school students and families. That's held this Thursday from 6 to 8 p.m. I'm told that if you want to get there, you need to get there early so that you have an opportunity to see the amazing facility and programs that LCTI offers. If you need information, there are details on both the district as well as the LCTI websites. The East Penn School District is looking for community representatives who are interested in serving as members of our facility teams. Specifically, the commitment is several meetings between the months of November through January to review our recent facility improvement options that we presented to the community last March, and to make recommendations in terms of which option seems to be the most viable or best meets the needs of the district. The committee is open to members of the general public who reside in the district, and the application period closes this Friday. Applications, you can apply online, and so please go to the district website to express your interest in being a part of this really important team. And finally, back in August of 2022, the board approved for Michael Billman to join East Penn as our new technology director. And Michael comes to us with 13 years of experience in leading technology in public education. And so with that breadth of experience, his previous district held him. And today he started in East Penn as our new director of technology. And so it gives me great pleasure to invite Michael to come up and personally meet each board member.
Congratulations, Michael. Welcome. Welcome aboard. Welcome aboard.
And so it has been a long time coming for us for Michael to arrive, and I was thrilled to see him in his office today. We are very excited for Michael to be joining our team. I also, as Michael transitions to his role, I just wanted to take a moment to publicly recognize and thank Ms. Val Witkowski, who has served as our interim technology director for several months until Michael has arrived. She has done a tremendous job in serving the district as interim technology director, and we sincerely appreciate her leadership and dedication to the department, our students, and our staff. And so we're fortunate to have a complete technology team once again. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Campbell. And again, welcome, Mr. Billman. Look forward to having you serve as our new tech director. Are there any questions, comments from the board on Dr. Campbell's report? Ms. Bowman.
Yes, I did notice on the facilities team request for people to join, on social media, somebody had asked about the time commitment, and I'm not sure if that person was ever responded to, but could you say a little bit more about how much time that will entail for
Sure,
somebody?
and we can certainly follow up and see if we can find the specific individual as well to clarify that. We anticipate that we will meet at least monthly from November through January. So it is a relatively short commitment. I anticipate, again, a maximum of 2 meetings per month. We recognize that there are some meetings where it really is important and valuable for us to be in person. We also recognize that we might be able to use technology and meet, dare I say, via Zoom. So, we're certainly it will be a relatively brief commitment. And ultimately, we very much want the community to have a voice and to offer feedback and to share their perspectives in terms of which options seem most viable for our organization and our community.
Thank you for that. And second, just wanted to make a comment that, well, I'll just speak for myself. When students come and speak before the board, they're usually my favorite meetings, and it includes even tonight when they're pointing out problems in the district. For one, it shows me just how amazingly eloquent and intelligent and assertive and everything that we want our graduates to be when these students come and speak before us. They show us that they're getting what we're hoping to teach at East Penn. And that's also why I'm so happy to see our 2 student representatives staying for the whole meeting. And I'm not trying to guilt you into doing that every meeting. I know our meetings sometimes go long, and often we're talking about stuff that would most likely seem pretty boring. But student participation is so healthy for a school district, to be coming to meetings and voicing problems, to be coming and listening and paying attention. That is really an amazing thing. So I just want to congratulate the 2 of you for staying, and the 4 students who spoke tonight. Just a request for the administration, I would love to see those students followed up with, especially about those specific incidents, to make sure that you're aware of each one and have looked into each one. Thank you.
You have our assurance that we will do that, and I actually believe that administration has already met with some of the students.
Thank you, Ms. Bowman. Any other comments, questions? Dr. Whitney?
Yeah, just a little bit more on the facility inquiry team. I think for myself, I could use a little guidance as to, you said it's a brief responsibility, but really what are the specific responsibilities? And I guess even more than that, what would be the ideal member of this team? And then what will the team ultimately do? And what, say, authority, or what leverage will the findings of that team have in your mind?
We envision that we will work in 3 teams, insert 3 teams, including a K-5 team, a 6 through 8 team, and a 9 through 12 team. Knowing the options that have been presented, we've already recognized that there will be a need for the K-8 team for some meetings to potentially combine. And I say that because there is an option that was presented last spring that would include some potential changes in grade level configurations at both elementary and middle level. And the composition of each of those teams will be parents, teachers, administrators, students, and we have some school board representatives who will be participating on those. We're calling them our facility inquiry teams. The purpose of each team is to review the options that have been presented as part of the facility study that was completed last year and presented at a public meeting. First, the teams need to understand the needs and what the situation or the issues that we're currently facing at each level, and then really discuss and understand the options that are presented and provide, from the lens of each of the perspectives that are represented, provide feedback in terms of which of those options seem to be most viable in terms of fulfilling the need. You might recall last year the district facilitated community listening sessions and also faculty listening sessions. For a number of reasons, we didn't have many members come to those meetings. And so certainly the goal would be to have representation from each of those stakeholder groups that I mentioned, really vetting the options and providing feedback. And then there's members from each of those subcommittees that will sit on a steering committee. And the ultimate goal would be that next winter, as part, or this coming school year, January to February-ish, to begin to provide a recommendation to the school board in terms of moving forward with a comprehensive facilities plan for the organization.
Thank you. I appreciate you
help?
taking the time to
Okay.
clarify that further. I just think
Sure.
this is a very important, these are some monumental decisions coming down the pike. And so I think it's really important that people do participate as much as they are able to. And I know these are big asks. So I wanted to make sure that everybody was clear on what the ask was. So
Great, thank you for
that.
clarifying.
And then I just want to add one quick thing and echo Ms. Bowman and thank the students and applaud the students who spoke tonight. Applaud their bravery and their eloquence, and to say that despite all the efforts that have been done and all the changes that have been made and all the good intentions that many people have, we clearly need to continue to do better, and the district needs to be the model for the community in terms of how we conduct ourselves and how we treat all of our students. So I appreciate their coming, and I appreciate their words. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Whitney. Any additional comments or questions? Again, I appreciate both Ms. Bowman's and Dr. Whitney's comments, and look forward to being able to follow up with the students and see if we can continue to make progress. With that, we'll move on to personnel. Before I ask for a motion, there are two corrections to note. First, on the personnel agenda itself, item 2, general leave of absences, uncompensated leave. Renee Horlocker's position is incorrectly listed as instructional assistant. It should be food service support staff. On item 10, in Exhibit B, Julie Malloy is incorrectly listed under staff assistants. The correct position is instructional assistant with the correct salary of $19.21 an hour. With that, I'll take a motion to accept the agenda.
So moved. Second.
Any comments, questions from the board? Seeing none, Ms. Allen, will you please call the roll?
Ms. Bowman,
Aye.
Mr. Byrd,
Aye.
Mr. Champagne,
Aye.
Mr. Falegi,
Aye.
Jankowski,
Aye.
Mr. Smith,
Aye.
Dr. Whitney,
Aye.
Mrs. Bowen,
Aye.
Dr. Levinson.
Aye. Thank you. All right, next item on the agenda is business operations. I'm going to take these in pieces. I'd like to first take items A through C together. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Are there any comments or questions on items A through C? Okay, seeing none, Ms. Allen, please call the roll.
Mr. Byrd,
Aye.
Mr. Champagne,
Aye.
Mr. Falegi,
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski,
Aye.
Mr. Smith,
Aye.
Dr. Whitney,
Aye.
Mrs. Bowen,
Aye.
Ms. Bowman,
Aye.
Dr. Levinson.
Aye.
9 ayes.
Thank you. I'd like to take next item, item D. I may have a motion.
So moved. Second.
Any comments or questions on item D? Seeing none, Ms. Allen, please call the roll.
Mr. Champagne,
Aye.
Mr. Falegi,
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski,
Aye.
Mr. Smith,
Aye.
Dr. Whitney,
No.
Mrs. Bowen,
Aye.
Ms. Bowman,
Aye.
Mr. Byrd,
No.
Dr. Levinson.
Aye.
7 ayes, 2 nays.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. Final item under business is item E. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any comments or questions from the board? Dr. Campbell, do you have some comments?
Yes, thank you. For the public record, I just wanted to clarify that this is an agreement between the school district and Lower Macungie Township. The township has approved this agreement at their October 6th meeting. The board and the community will note that this is what I would describe as a short-term agreement for October of 2022 through this December of 2022. And it is for a total cost in which the township would reimburse the school district for the crossing guard program for that period of time in the amount of $6,625. The other piece that I wanted to point out is that on page 1, item number 2 of the agreement, there is the amount, the hourly rates for both the crossing guard as well as the head guard are incorrect. the amount, the annual salary, or I should say the hourly rate for the crossing guards as approved by the East Penn School Board at our August meeting is $16 per hour for crossing guards and $17.40 per hour for the head guard. Again, that does not impact the overall total dollar amount that the township would reimburse the district for the period of time. But I did just want to clarify that for the record, that certainly we are paying the crossing guards at the hourly rate that had been approved by the school board. The other piece that I want to say is that as discussed at the Lower Macungie Township Commissioners meeting, Mr. Beidel and I will work together to potentially look at options moving forward, meaning from January on. And so once we have some information, I will certainly bring that back to the board.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Campbell. Hearing that, are there any questions or comments from the board? I'd just like to briefly mention that I do appreciate Lower Macungie Township making the effort to cost share with us, and we look forward to moving forward with a new agreement for January of next year. Okay, seeing no other comments, Ms. Allen, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Falegi,
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski,
Aye.
Mr. Smith,
Aye.
Dr. Whitney,
Aye.
Mrs. Bowen,
Aye.
Ms. Bowman,
Aye.
Mr. Byrd,
Aye.
Mr. Champagne,
Aye.
Dr. Levinson.
Aye.
9 ayes.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. Okay, next item on the agenda is curriculum. I'm going to take the items separately. May I have a motion for item A, educational conferences?
So moved. Second.
Any comments or questions?
I'd just like to ask a question, just if you could talk a little bit about the conference that's on here for the systems design benchmarking. I was looking at it, and it sounds really amazing and wonderful, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what your team hopes to achieve through participating in this.
Yes, great question. I appreciate you noticing that and for the interest in it. This particular professional learning opportunity is sponsored by the National Center for Education and the Economy System, specifically looking at system-level change. And so the timing of it is really beneficial for both administrators as well as teachers. You'll see that we have a team of about 22 individuals who will be participating that represent all three levels in the organization, elementary, middle, and high school, and thinking about the system level change that we have been working on for some time. And those are the goals that are articulated in our comprehensive plan when we think about high quality instruction and intervention, social and emotional learning, everything through the lens of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so NCEES really takes an organization and guides them through a system level change, looking at those intersections not only between that happen at your local organization, but also really sort of stepping back and looking at education as well from the global view and learning from and how such changes have happened in other successful educational systems, again, not just here in the United States, but really outside of the United States as well.
Thank you. Sounds like a great opportunity.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Whitney, for the question. Any others? All right, Ms. Allen, please call the roll.
Mr. Jankowski,
Aye.
Mr. Smith,
Aye.
Dr. Whitney,
Aye.
Mrs. Bowen,
Aye.
Ms. Bowman,
Aye.
Mr. Byrd,
Aye.
Mr. Champagne,
Aye.
Mr. Falegi,
Aye.
Dr. Levinson.
Aye.
9 ayes.
Thank you. Next item under curriculum is item B, new secondary math curricula. May I have a motion?
So moved. Aye. Sorry. Second.
Thank you. I think we know how you're going to vote.
Yeah.
Any comments or questions?
You can say no just to shake it up.
All right, seeing none. Ms. Allen, please call the roll.
Mr. Smith,
Aye.
Dr. Whitney,
Aye.
Mrs. Bowen,
Aye.
Ms. Bowman,
Aye.
Mr. Byrd,
Aye.
Mr. Champagne,
Aye.
Mr. Falegi,
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski,
Aye.
Dr. Levinson.
Aye.
9 ayes.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. Item C is for informational purposes only on a textbook adoption. If there are no questions on that, I'd like to move to item D, And Dr. Campbell, would you like to introduce this one?
Yes, thank you. This is always an exciting time of the year for us. And in many ways, it's like we might say, wow, it's only October and we're already starting to plan for next year already. But it is already October. And of course, we need to start planning for next year. And so this is part of our presentation tonight is we're really excited to have Mrs. Garriello for the first time present the program of studies, which as our board is familiar with, is the comprehensive list of course offerings at Emmaus High School. I say this every year, but one of my first takeaways is just how proud I am at the breadth and the variety of courses that we offer to challenge all students at Emmaus High School. And there really do seem to be many, many courses for all. So as part of this evening's presentation, Mrs. Garriello will provide a high-level overview of what I'm going to describe as some of the more substantive changes to the program of studies. In addition, we then have members from the Office of Teaching and Learning who will provide some background in terms of the context and rationale for some additional, again, system-level changes that we are proposing in terms of the course offerings at Emmaus High School. Specifically, we want to delve more deeply into some of the proposed changes in terms of the tracks that we currently offer in certain content areas. And so we'll discuss that as well tonight. I think it's really important to understand that tonight is about presentation and discussion. Certainly, we want your feedback. We know that there's always then an opportunity for community feedback as well. And so we will not come back to the board until November for a potential vote then on the program of studies. So with that, I'll turn things over to Mrs. Garriello.
Thank you. And I know we sent home a very large document to all of you with all the details. And I have to say that it was a collaborative effort between our department chairs, our teachers within the departments, and Ms. Gamble, who worked tirelessly putting this together. It was a big undertaking. You'll notice a lot of minor changes, and a lot of wording changes to the program of studies. When I first got here and when I started meeting with some parents and with students and with the staff, there was a consistent comment that came back that sometimes the course descriptions were difficult to understand to really get a flavor for what the course was. So you will see that in the document and a lot of the changes, many of them were just streamlining the wording and trying to take the more complicated description of a course and simplify it for parents and students to understand it better. So you'll see a lot of edits to the course descriptions, and it is just a better reflection of the teaching that's going on in the classroom and trying to understand, help the parents and students understand what the course is really all about. You'll notice that there were a lot of prerequisite changes. These adjustments have been made to make courses more accessible to a larger number of students while still explaining the fundamental expectations and skills needed for students to be successful. We were trying to align the prerequisites to within a department and then also between departments. So there was a little bit more consistency, but basically to make the courses more accessible to a larger group of students. Our drop ad process really had never had an end date, never had a due date. So we added a due date. And so for students, we wanted them to have the opportunity to try out courses and get a good feel for the expectations and the teacher. But we also wanted to provide them a window of time in which they had the opportunity to change their mind if they needed to. So we've added 2 deadlines to the drop ad procedure for the first semester or year-long classes. We have requested a September 30th deadline for the drop ad process to end. And then for second semester courses, a February 28th deadline. That gives about 6 weeks, between 5 and 6 weeks, for students to try out a course before they need to make their final decision. We also would like to add the opportunity for DCO, which stands for Diversified Career Options. This is run through our LCTI. It's a fantastic program for students. They gain credit. They also work in the workplace out in the community, and they are supervised by Mr. Baylog from LCTI. But currently, we only offer that to 12th graders. We would like to expand that down into our 11th graders. And then, of course, with the continuation of our Jasper courses, we want to add in the senior level courses so the students who started in Jasper can continue on next year. That would give a full complement of 9th to 12th grade for our Jasper students. So those are some overviews in general to the program of studies. We also recognize that we have some struggling students and we have some kids that need to make up some fundamental skills. And so we believe that given additional time, not change our expectations, not change the standards that we're working toward, the skills that we're working toward, but providing additional time for students to achieve those standards, to achieve those skills, will benefit them. And so we are requesting the addition of an English 9-10 lab and an English 11-12 lab that students who are struggling based on our screener data would be placed into, and that would be in addition to their normal English course for the year. So this would be additional time to help support the skills that they need to be successful in English classes. And again, we would be using our FastBridge data that we used, and this was the first year the high school did screeners on all the kids in both math and English. And this is the first year that we're having a multi-tiered system of support process or child study team process at the high school as well. So we have a better system for identifying students who need additional supports. So again, the ELA lab would be in addition to their English course. The reason it's grouped the way it is because the 9-10 English standards are very similar. Because they lead into the Keystone, and 9-10 is kind of grouped together, so the English standards are similar in 9th and 10th grade. In 11th and 12th grade, they change a bit, but between 11th and 12th grade, they are also similar. So that's why the skills that we would like to reinforce in these labs would be grouped between 9th and 10th grade, and then also 11th and 12th grade. Additionally, we would like to add an additional math lab. Right now, we have an Algebra 1 lab, again, providing more time, more instruction, more practice, more processing for our students in Algebra 1, but we would also like to add that same model, that additional time to our Fundamentals of Algebra class as well. And we have the screening data that we know we have quite a few students that need additional help and need additional skills. We don't want to lower those expectations. We just want to give them more time and more practice and more instruction to achieve, more support to achieve those expectations. We have a lot of kids that need this support. So to be honest, we're going to need to triage if we get these courses, but we are going to have to prioritize and triage the kids to identify the students with the greatest need and where we can feel we can do the most help for those kids. And lastly, currently students who fail a course at the high school right now have a few options. They can go to summer school, they can do our after-school program called Hive, which started last week. But we would also like to add one more option for students. We would like to add 2 credit recovery courses within the school day. This helps for kids that can't drive or parents that can't pick them up. And we're going to model that after the courses that we have in the summer and in the evening. They're going to be taught by teachers, but because the students have sat through these courses once and seen the curriculum at least once, they've gone through the entire course. These are students who have already failed these courses. We would like these credit recovery courses to be semester long, yet still yield the full credit, just like we do for summer school or our after-school program Hive. Currently, those kids are they're retaking the entire course. And we have a lot of kids that are reseated, if you will, in the year-long classes during the school day. So we would like to pull them out, give them more targeted support for those classes instead of having them go through the entire course all over again. And sometimes they're significantly older than the students that they're sitting with. So if they failed a 9th grade English class, let's say, or social studies class, and they may be an 11th or 12th grader, it's a big difference. So we would like to provide the appropriate grouping and have those credit recovery classes in addition, but run during the school day. It also helps with any barriers for students that might not be able to attend over the summer or after school. And at that point, I'm going to turn it over. Okay.
There we go. Okay, so one of the additional changes that you might have seen when you were examining the program of studies is the proposal to remove the GP track in our English and social studies courses. So we wanted to take a few minutes and sort of explain some of the background of that decision making. So as with all good stories, I'm going to go backwards before we go forwards and talk just for a minute about our mission and vision statement for the district. So some of you may have sat on that, our comprehensive planning cycle in 2018 when that was last revisited. And ultimately, the mission and vision itself was not addressed or changed. But what was added to the mission and vision in 2018 was our portrait of a graduate. And ultimately, the portrait was designed to sort of answer the question, like, what does effective problem solvers, collaborators, and critical thinkers, what does that actually look like? So this was our hope to further contextualize our mission and vision statement. So you see this list of skills and attributes that we hope to instill in our students before they graduate, before they leave us and go on to the world. In addition to that, in 2020, we sort of reinvested in a focus on equity as a district. We became more intentional about our pursuit of equitable learning experiences for all of our students. We created a district definition of equity, and you can see it here on the screen, and trained all of our staff members on the importance of this definition, as well as our 4 frames. Every member of our professional staff, every member employed by East Penn, so bus drivers, our custodial teams, everyone that works with us went through this initial training. As I mentioned, we did also create 4 specific frames related to the definition. Ideally, these frames allow us to zoom in and specifically address common barriers to educational equity. The intent here is to use these frames in district decision-making. Okay, now I'll switch gears a little bit and talk about professional development and curriculum, but we're still sort of looking at the past. This is still part of the timeline of the story. So in 2014, Mrs. Whitman joined the curriculum office, and at that time, it was just a 2-person team. And she began professional development focused on student-centered learning. With the English department, this included training on the workshop model, student choice and literature circles, and authentic grammar instruction. When I began my work in the curriculum office in 2018, I sort of picked up that ball, but learned from the teams that they felt like their written curriculum was actually a barrier to them implementing these new instructional strategies. So based on that feedback, we engaged in a curriculum revision and designed a curriculum that was skills-based and allowed for that student-centered instructional approach. When our first year of implementation, however, the curriculum was approved and was meant to be implemented starting in 2019. So our first year of implementation was interrupted by COVID. However, we have continued through the pandemic professional development related to the authentic use of a whole class text, responding to student data, and the universal design for learning. So at this point, you may be asking yourself, what does a student-centered classroom actually look like? What does that mean? So ultimately, there are a few clear components to this student-centered approach. It starts or includes, and not any necessarily in this order, but it includes all of these components. The concept of explicit modeled instruction on a skill or topic, so that's where the teacher is the expert and they're explaining something to the student. Guided practice, so this is where the student is engaged in doing a thing while the teacher is sort of the guide on the side, providing on the spot timely feedback. It also includes collaboration, inquiry, and discussion among students as well as between the students and the teacher. And it usually includes student choice, and that student choice may be on topic, on how they present the information, how they gather the information. Went a step further to sort of just explain what that might look like in an 80-minute period at the high school. Starts with a bell ringer, so that's sort of where we're checking for understanding. What did the students remember from the next day? Or maybe it's a community building activity, some kind of collaborative discussion, background building for the new learning. If I'm in an English classroom, this might be because I'm getting ready to introduce a new text and I want to build some background about the time period that text takes place in. In a history class, maybe I just want to know what my kids know about a certain topic before we jump into it. Then there's 20 minutes of direct instruction with modeling. This is where the teacher is providing that new content to the students so they understand what they're supposed to walk away with. Then there's 30 minutes of a workshop or an activity period. Again, this is where that guided practice lives. This is where the students have the opportunity to be doing something while their teacher and other classmates are there to provide support, structure, and feedback. I think it's important to think about this. Sometimes when we say workshop and we say the teacher's working with students, sometimes the automatic assumption is that they're only going to be working with the lowest students in the class or the neediest students in the class. I think it's important to recognize that time period is also when they're pulling the students who writing a thesis statement might have come really easily to them, but they didn't do a good enough job synthesizing the research that they just pulled. So the teacher needs to do maybe a mini lesson just with that group of students. And then ultimately 10 minutes of closure. And this is where the teacher's reinforcing the major teaching point from the day. Perhaps the students share out the major teaching point from the day. But really it's just the way to make sure the class ends and everybody's sort of on the same page. I'm going to pass it off to Mrs. Whitman, and she's going to talk about some additional professional development and equitable practices.
Thank you. And so last year in March, I highlighted information for all secondary staff that essentially make equitable practices visible in our classrooms. This is acting on feedback we had from students in addition to goals we had in our comprehensive plan. I outlined 20 observable and research-based classroom practices that promote both equity and high-quality core instruction. Some are very simple and do not require professional development. For instance, welcoming students by name as they enter the classroom and asking students for correct pronunciation of names, correctly pronouncing students' names, and this again comes from feedback we had from our students. Asking students for feedback on the effectiveness of instruction, again through interviews or conferences, surveys, or questionnaires. It's just the practice of teachers getting regular feedback on the instruction and then the ability to reflect on that and adjust. Students are provided with options to demonstrate their learning, and this goes way back to Carol Tomlinson differentiation, professional development, but follows through with things like project-based learning, universal design for learning. So this is, again, something that we want to provide students the opportunity for as part of student-centered practices. And so we talk about, as Darren said, the story of where we've been. There's two different things that we're talking about. There are curriculum-based strategies that departments are involved in that professional development in preparing for curriculum revision and or just best practice in their departments. And then there's equitable practices, and that is universal regardless of the content area that you teach. So this year, we have moved forward and offered, and Erin's going to speak to this a little bit more, but like some choice based on teachers self-assessing on where they're at with universal design for learning, culturally responsive teaching, social emotional learning, and inclusive practices. We started that work last March in giving every teacher in secondary a basic understanding and common language so that they could make an informed choice in terms of self-assessing and deciding what it was they needed professional development in.
Okay, so the district maintains a focus on developing learners based on the skills and attributes found in the portrait of a graduate. However, we had requests from our teaching teams that they really wanted to have more choice over their professional development. So in order to do that, we designed 4 specific learning pathways. These learning pathways are each aligned to the portrait and the comprehensive plan. However, it allowed the teachers to make choice on which one best fit their personalized needs as an educator. As you can see, there were 4 pathways: brain-based instruction, inclusive practices, social emotional learning, and culturally responsive pedagogy. Oh no, I'm still up. Sorry. In January 2021, the board approved an equity policy. Among other things, this policy requires that a district team engage in an equity audit. Results of our audit were characterized into two sections: safe schools and academics. You saw some of the safe schools work when Ms. Whitman presented the revised student code of conduct over the summer. On the academic side, we examined state testing data, local assessment data, and course-taking patterns K-12. When we presented the comprehensive plan, we shared these findings and explained the action steps to not only increase overall proficiency, but also help remediate the disproportionality that we saw in that data. In part, we hope to do this by increasing access to interventions and providing additional tiered supports. The audit team requested more than 1 year's worth of course-taking data at the high school, especially because they wanted to look at a year that would be considered, quote, more normal. The team did not identify concerning behaviors in K-8, but did indicate concern with observations made in the 9-12 course-taking patterns. The following slides will provide a summary of the course-taking data for this school year at Emmaus High School. So there is visuals on the screen, and I'm going to take a minute to orient all of us to those visuals because you'll see them on the following slides as well. So if you could look at the left-hand student and that visual, I'll explain that breakdown. So essentially the face of the student represents the race and ethnicity breakdown by that course. So the face is race, ethnicity. You can see on the right-hand side there is a key, in case you're wondering what the colors stand for. The student's chest is going to indicate the name of the course and the track. The student's stomach, that is where you find the percentage of students qualifying for free and reduced lunch represented in that track or that course. And then in the student's hands is a banner, and the banner they are holding represents the number of students with IEPs in that course. Before we look at the course data specifically, it's really important that we look first to the right, and the student in yellow on the right-hand side, that represents Emmaus High School in total. So that is what we would consider natural proportions. So we would want all of our other courses, our courses in our high school, to demonstrate natural proportions that align somewhat to what you see on that student in yellow. Okay? All right. So I wanted to actually before I move on, I'd like you to sort of just take like a screen capture in your head of that individual in yellow, because you'll want to use that as your comparison as we move through the additional slides. So what we see on this slide is the representation of English 9 at our high school. You see the GP track, the CP track, and then the honors track. You can see in particular that again, if you're comparing the faces of the students in these tracks to the student in yellow on this slide, there is disproportionality, most significant in the GP track. The other thing I will draw your attention to is the student's stomach and the banner they're holding, where the student's stomach is representing that 55% of the students in that track are students who qualify for free and reduced lunch, and 51 of those students are students with IEPs. I will move a little more quickly through the following slides. Now we're looking at English 10. Again, I would ask you to draw your attention to the student's face and the overall makeup, and then also the percentages that are provided on the student's stomach and in the banners. This is English 11, and also English 12. And now we'll switch to social studies. This is American Studies 1. That's the 9th grade course. American Studies 2, which is our 10th grade course. World Studies, 11th grade. And then finally, our 12th grade in social studies is actually made up of several different courses in some cases, so I won't list them all, but this is overall the 12th grade social studies breakup. Okay, so then on the next slide, what we wanted to draw your attention to is this is what our 9th grade science offering looks like for the majority of our students in ninth grade. It's important to mention, and Ms. Whitman's going to go into this in a little bit more detail later in the presentation, but in 2018, during that curriculum revision, the GP track was dissolved in science. And you can see that with that track dissolved, we have proportions that are slightly more aligned with the overall proportions of Emmaus High School. And that persists also into 10th grade. Okay.
So I think the question is, why would we propose a reduction in tracks and removal of the GP track? And so I think partly we wanted to be able to share that visual data of the disproportion in the GP track. Again, this is out of K-12 based on the work of the audit committee that we've focused on this. And coming from middle level, there are only 2 levels. And then students are then put into that track as they enter into the high school in grade 9 in humanities subjects currently. Again, I think the track itself has not yielded the proficiency or the positive measures of growth that we would like to see, reflect strong core instruction. Our performance before COVID in 2019, our performance sent Emmaus High School into targeted support improvement by the state. This was based on several indicators, but primarily students with disabilities achieved below the statewide average. Our economically disadvantaged students and Hispanic students were close to falling under the statewide average at that time. Thirdly, this is also being proposed with the timing because we just completed the first screening of all Emmaus High School students. We hadn't done that in the past. Again, with the use of ESSER funds, we've added interventions. Last year, we screened students who were in the GP track, but not the entire high school. And so we can see how many students are falling below the 40th percentile in math or reading. The other piece to this that's new for our seniors this year is that there are currently Act 158 requirements. The easiest path for students is to pass the math algebra, and literature keystone. And again, there are alternative pathways for our students, but again, improvement in those scores would result and benefit our students and our district in addressing that issue. And so what does the research say? And again, I'm going to quote the National Association of School Psychologists. The considerations on tracking is that lower ability achieves less in lower track classes than in mixed ability classes. Higher ability students do not achieve more in track classes than in mixed ability classes. Placing students with lower ability in track classroom reduces self-esteem with a particularly negative effect on students' sense of their own academic competence. It reduces the likelihood that students placed in lower track classes will choose college preparatory courses in their course taking, in the future course taking. It reduces opportunities to develop relationships among students from other racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic groups. And placement decisions concerning a building grouping is often made very early in a student's school career. It's often based on questionable data, and it can be enduring. Considerations on detracking is that it gives all students equal access to an enriched curriculum and the highest quality instruction that schools have to offer. And you'll hear multiple times it being called good core instruction, but that's what we're looking for. It avoids labeling and stigmatizing students with lower ability. It promotes higher expectations for student achievement. It reduces in-school segregation based on SES, race, gender, or ethnicity, or disability. It encourages teachers to accommodate individual differences in students' instructional and social needs. And it enables students to learn from their peers, including students whose background may be different from their own. The other piece of research that, again, when we talk in the early stages of a systems change, that we, and Mrs. Gariello spoke to this already when talking about the ELA lab edition. Strong core instruction paired with effective general education intervention meets students' needs quicker, better, and more cost effectively. And so part of this is we're looking at how we, by instituting this change, how we might use staff differently, particular to special education, to support students in a much more focused and targeted way. Another question that I've received often is, do our demographically alike high school peers have 5 tracks like we do in ELA or social studies? And when I talk about demographically alike, we have an upcoming data presentation at the next board meeting that will be comprehensive. We do not mention other school districts' names in the public, but the way that we select our demographically like schools is we look for high schools that are over 1,800 students. And then we look at the other demographic factors that we've mentioned all throughout this presentation. We look at race, ethnicity, economically disadvantaged, IEP ratio, GIP, and that is how we arrive at these comparisons. I will tell you that these are the same districts that we compared ourselves to in 2016 when we presented for math resources, with the addition of one high school that in that meantime has grown more diverse, and the high school has grown over that 1,800 bar. The other piece that I would highlight is at the time when we looked at this in 2016, only 2 of us in our peer group were doing the 5 tracks and having the GP track, or a track that was below CP level. So, and in the meantime, through COVID, the other district has now detracked and no longer has the below CP level. So how are we going to support students who struggle with core curriculum? If the answer is all students get to access what we currently call our on-level CP level core curriculum. And again, to address both failures and skill deficits, we want to add an ELA lab for regular education and special education students identified as needing a Tier 2 support, and target those skill deficits as well as support for success in their core English class. We already had math lab in place for identified students in algebra for a few years, and based on our math data, as Mrs. Garriell mentioned, we want to expand that math lab for fundamentals of algebra students. We want to be able to focus our special education teachers on instructional support for one area of content with either math or reading and ELA as top priority. Right now, we have special ed teachers spread among 4 content areas. And we believe now it's time for us to focus them and focus them on providing the supports that students need to be successful in the core courses. We also have something new this year, thanks to some tweaks to our AB block schedule, that special education teachers are free to meet and support students on their caseload during Hornet Homeroom all year. So how will teachers be supported through this transition? Again, we promote some self-assessment on core instructional strategies with the option now that we haven't had in the past. We have 2 instructional coaches available for the high school staff to work with for individualized coaching and feedback. Both of those individuals are experienced. One is our current science chair who went through the science change and was an instructor for GSI. And so she has taught all of the students who were in a core instruction course after we made the change to eliminate GP in 9th grade science. And the other currently is teaching one block in the AB block schedule. And she's teaching a consolidated Latin 2, level 2, 3, and 4, where she's differentiating for the students' needs in that language course and modeling success with that differentiation. The other piece is that we are certainly going to offer additional professional development to teachers in universal design for learning and or differentiation PD, and then common assessments. Right now at the high school, we have common assessments in midterms and finals, but the plan is to develop additional common assessments for implementation in 23-24 for department members teaching a common course to be able to analyze data and trends and talk to one another about the instruction in the classroom leading up to those assessments. So what happened after we stopped offering the GP level in 9th and or 10th grade science? Biology CP, so as Erin had mentioned, and I can go back to the slide if asked, it's closer to the natural proportions of our student population. Student failures decreased. We were reseating as we're coming up with solutions when we have students who fail and we have to reseat them and have credit recovery issues. We were reseating a number of biology GP failures at the time we made the change. First-time biology keystone testers increased in proficiency. And right now, the highest advanced percentage of our 3 keystones is biology. Our student growth in biology is well above and has consistently been well above. And then there's another piece to this that I think is notable. Couple different things. I think there was maybe some incorrect communication to the community. There's no intent with removing the GP track of disbanding co-teaching and co-teaching, when I say that, is referring to a regular education teacher and a special education teacher in the same classroom helping to deliver core instruction. Right now, we have it going on in biology. And the other piece I think that was mentioned was a reduction of pullout. And again, pullout is a function of data and a student's IEP, and we provide that instruction when that's necessary. So back to my inclusion story, I think what's important to note here is after we initially inform teachers about the proposal, Mrs. Garriello and I were talking about, we wondered if our co-taught biology looked disproportional, just based on what it looked like GP, because it wasn't something that we'd analyzed. And when we looked at the co-taught sections of biology, we saw it to be more natural proportions than we did see the disproportion that we still see in GP. So we don't believe that, there's a lot of different factors that could contribute to that, and I can't pinpoint one for you because there's several things feeding into that. But it's I think, a positive of, again, that change. And so why the urgency? And I think this is an important piece to this. One is obviously addressing the major disproportion in course placement and tracking, while also addressing the lack of growth and achievement in that track. We would like to see the students grow and show positive growth in our English courses. And we also think that now more than ever, it is important that on their first time of taking the Keystone, they have an ability to be proficient. The other piece to this is, again, supporting all students. With that screening of the students who are 40% or below, the ELA lab is something that really does provide us an ability to support a tremendous number of students. The systems change that I'm talking about, again, this is a two-parter. Because what we want to see in addressing disproportion is, certainly when you looked at even the honors levels courses, it still wasn't the natural proportion of our school. But as long as we have these multiple tracks, I think we have to work first. It's a part one, part two. We have to work first on increased growth and proficiency with all kids getting good core instruction. And then part two is, then how do we challenge students and see more diversity in our AP and honors track? So again, I think the goal here is to focus on the GP track this year, but again, in 3 years' time, we should be in position based on, I would hope, improved data to challenge more students to take an AP course or to be involved in our honors programming. And then again, I'm just going to refer us back to the language that we had in terms of developing equitable environments. I think that's important, as it was language that we provided professional development on last year to all staff in the district, not just at the secondary level.
Okay. Before I open it up to questions, I'd first like to thank the administration for the detailed presentation and providing a lot more context to understand the reason for the changes and what's proposed in order to implement this and why it's important. So with that, I'd like to now open it up to questions from the board. Ms. Bowen?
I have some questions. When you're talking about all student populations being able to participate in this universally, those are some pretty big words, and I am curious as to the breakdowns of students with IEPs who would be able to participate in these classrooms. And this might be an antiquated term, but are these predominantly IEP students that would have been considered part-time learning support or pull-out students in the past?
So when we, in our GP track currently, there are in our humanities subject areas, and Erin, I'm going to pull you up for pull-out information. So we do have the fifth track that we acknowledge that is pull-out, where they're receiving their core instruction is different than the core instruction that's being delivered based on the curriculum revision that Dr. Murphy did with the English and social studies curriculum.
Do you consider the pull-out classroom to be a general ed classroom or a special ed classroom?
That's a great question. So a pull-out classroom, in the language that we use in East Penn, is a special education classroom. And I think that where the term pull-out gets a little bit muddy is we have pull-out that exists in different structures. So for an autistic support student or a student who has been identified as with an intellectual disability, those students are not included in the core curriculum, but that is because they're receiving a structured replacement curriculum. So for a student who may be identified with an IEP and is receiving autistic support services, they have ITT or, again, some kind of replacement curriculum that's targeting their individual academic needs. Similar with a student with an intellectual disability, there's been curriculum that has been developed to meet those students' needs. So that's sort of like programming-based pull-out courses. Then there are also pull-out courses that take the board-approved curriculum and then just move slow and I guess just move slow. So they probably cover, I believe, about 25% of the board-approved curriculum in those courses. So those courses are, in the past, have been, students have been assigned to those courses based on just teacher recommendation, possibly during an IEP team meeting. But now that we have a lot of data, at our disposal, we can make much better decisions, in particular about those students and where they would best fit into our course system. Does that help answer that question?
It does. So this proposal going forward, just to make sure that I have this, that I'm understanding this correctly, there would still be pull-out, which is considered a special education room. And then there would be college prep, and then honors, and then AP. So my question for you is students that might be on the verge of participating in what was the GP track, that I'm assuming was a general education setting. Mm-hmm. You've now eliminated an entire track for students who might be right there. And then at the back of their IEP, that percentage of time when they're included just continues to dwindle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's okay. And I'm going to give the instance of the biology co-taught sections. So the biology co-taught sections where I believe that we would target, what I want to say, maintenance of the biology co-teaching is again based on student profiles. So right now, what the approach has been is everything, the core classes are co-taught. But because we build, if this makes sense, if I take the math, and that's why the percentages look this high, if I take the math of the students who are being included, and I only create 5 sections for them, obviously I am putting them in, like, the percentage of those students are not reflective of natural proportions, which again, I think is part of the, maybe part of what's contributing to the high degree of growth in the biology, where again, the other needs are filtering out among the 20 sections being offered of GSI or biology. But so what we do see coming out of that in science is increased growth, well above the expectations of the state, and that includes for students with disabilities. What we've seen that put us into targeted improvement was, again, a lack of growth that was actually below the state average. And so it's one of the measures. One of the other things that we're able to do now is use our own screeners. We find a high correlation to our standardized testing. And so we can actually use the screeners to also measure that student growth and determine what placement is working for the student to meet their needs.
Sorry.
That's all right.
I guess my concern going forward is, and I understand what you're saying about the data-driven decision-making, and I'm not saying that I dispute that for a majority of the students enrolled in our district. But I think that there's a flaw in the system if you're removing an entire track where kids with IEPs could participate in a non-special education setting.
So similar to the middle level tracks that we have right now, do you share that like same concern with the fact that we carry honors and then the on-level grade in our curriculum in 6, 7, and 8?
Oh, you shouldn't have asked me about that.
Okay, so maybe I should table that. No, I was actually.
I think my concern is that there's an entire population of students where, and this is not to be critical of you or the administration.
Sure.
It is exhausting to sit here and see the words all and universal and know that that doesn't apply to one of my children. It's exhausting. I think that this eliminates an entire group of classrooms that are fundamentally general education settings for kids that might be able to otherwise participate. My fear is that when my son is 18, is his percentage of time in general education almost 0? I mean, there's lunch where he'll sit with his autistic support peers.
I think what I would, in my head, circle back to is that, and Ms. Whitman shared this, that the data that exists for that track indicates that that track is not serving those students. So while, yeah, it's a place where 50% of the kids with IEPs happen to be sitting, we don't have a lot of data that says that when they're sitting there, that good things are happening for them.
So I guess then my question would be, instead of eliminating the track, why aren't we fixing it?
Well, I think that kind of goes back to it's really hard to create natural proportions when there are so many different places for the kids to be. So when you combine the tracks and increase the population, then it allows those natural proportions to shake out.
Okay.
And I apologize not knowing specifics, and I don't think our director of special ed's here, so I feel I don't want to say anything that is not completely accurate tonight.
I think it's just difficult. I've been around now long enough to have heard some SCL presentations. I've heard about the surveys. The surveys, I don't know if, I know you said in the spring, phase 2 was to deliver those to students with special needs and families of students who might not be able to respond independently. Yeah. I've spent a lot of hours here listening to the great things that we're doing for a majority of the district, but I wonder about the kids who are going to fall through the cracks. And I don't dispute that the GP track was maybe not beneficial to the student population that I'm referring to, but I wonder what track is. There's not a place for some of these students in this presentation.
I guess the only other thing that I would point to is that having worked with an autistic support population and worked with an intellectually disabled population, both at the elementary level and middle level, when those students are with peers performing at all different levels who, when they're included in music class, or when I taught 5th grade, they were included in my social studies class and my science class. So when they were included in those sections, they were able to work really well with their regular education peers. So I hear what you're saying, that it seems like going from whatever setting a child is in now, it seems like this would be a really nice step to go into GP before they moved anywhere else. But I think the reality is that just removing that, giving them the opportunity to be in the space with regular education peers is going to sort of be an upgrade and a more inclusive environment. So I wouldn't necessarily look at it like they lost a step. The reality is they're just being included. And that's where the differentiation comes in.
So is the suggestion that students in a program such as autistic support would participate in the CP track?
I guess my suggestion is that that always has to be the decision of an IEP team. So it's really hard to speak in broad strokes about what I would when I don't have specific data about individual students.
I think what I'm struggling with is what I heard, and this is a quote from your presentation, that equitable practices are universal. This does not seem universal to me. It seems to me that if we can figure out a way during the IEP process to fit certain kids into certain places sometimes, that we'll try to do it, sort of. My other concern is when you addressed the fact that faculty and staff you provided them choice as far as what trainings or what areas of weakness they felt they had, that's what they actively pursued. But if this tracking system and this new program is to benefit all of the students universally, then I don't understand why we're not promoting the training in all 4 of those categories.
So I think the goal was to start, and this was again based on feedback that we had from professional staff, was to start in something that, again, I have teachers who are very strong in SEL, and I know them and have been here for years. I can name the people who have had practices that in the manner in which they begin class. Now I've seen some people who started to do that even based on the very basic training that we engaged in on SEL that I hadn't seen doing those things prior. There is supposed to be some cross-learning in cohorts at the building level, but first we wanted people to be able to experience a pathway that they at least self-assessed and had interest in, to again share what it is and how they've changed in their classroom with the others, like a cross-pollination, if you will. I can appreciate, I'm spinning back to the universal, so that I want to be clear that universal and equitable wasn't necessarily tied together, but the universal design for learning is an entire approach of how to plan so that you can meet the needs of as many students and a diverse group of students in your classroom. And so that's every time you're hearing universal, that is a moniker for brain-based, CAST brain-based learning. That is the universal design for learning, and that's a planning strategy for teachers and instructors.
I guess I'll leave it at this. I did also hear in the presentation the reference to the lowest and neediest students in a group. Those are not my words. It seems to me from the presentation and also from your answers to my questions that a student in autistic support who might genuinely be the lowest and neediest of students, which I would also encourage us not to use those terms in the future. I still don't see a place for students like that in this. And I really question how a general education teacher, especially at the high school level, who is super focused on their discipline specifically, is going to encompass all the needs of students in that building in a college prep track.
I appreciate your feedback.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Bowen. Ms. Bowman.
Yes, just want to thank Mrs. Bowen for her excellent questions. One of them actually helped me to understand something that I was struggling with last week, and the lived experience that you shared here is valuable, and I hope that the administration continues to maybe bring you into the process so that they can better understand yours and probably the viewpoints of other parents in the same situation. I did have one question that has absolutely nothing to do with tracks, and I thought I'd ask that first before asking tracking questions. The drop add process with the deadlines, why do we need to have a deadline? I know that sounds silly to ask, but I'm just curious, like, what happens when you don't have a deadline?
So in the past, and I haven't lived it yet, but from what I understand, courses were being dropped as late as March and April in the school year. And then the students, there's obviously nowhere to put them at that point. And we feel that the kids need to make a commitment, and families need to make a commitment, and we think that the 6-week time frame is enough time to get a good assessment in, to understand the course, the syllabus, the expectations, and we would like the kids to follow through and stick with it, but still give them that option at the start of the course to give it a try and see if it's a good fit.
Do you have exceptions in this plan for students who are having extreme?
Absolutely.
So I'm going to say mental health needs,
Absolutely.
physical needs, where they're failing the class and they just need to be out of there in order to get better.
Absolutely. Exceptional circumstances, traumatic events at home, a death in the family, mental health needs, certainly doctor's notes, right. we would honor all of that, absolutely. But for a student who just decides they don't want to take the final exam, we need to stop that.
So this deadline is generally set in stone except for certain circumstances that you've thought about ahead of time, or?
Absolutely.
And does a student, what do they do, go to their guidance counselor with that?
Yes, so there's a form to fill out, and we encourage first to talk to the guidance counselor, the school counselor, and then also, of course, speak with the teacher of the course, and of course their parents, and there's sections that they have to fill out as well in the form.
Thank you for that.
You got it.
Okay, for tracking. Okay, that was my drop question. I think a lot of my concern and questions really are similar to what Mrs. Bowen brought up. And I am thankful that you mentioned the research, how other schools have fared, and actually how East Penn has fared doing this with science. And I find that part of it encouraging, but at the same time, I do worry about pushing students inappropriately. Even if it's, I think there's a tendency of us to want to push them as hard as we possibly can, get them to excel as much as they can. And we are in an epidemic of anxiety right now with kids. And so I do worry a little bit about having expectations that are beyond what students can reach. Obviously, I also worry about the opposite, which is what you talked about tonight, where our expectations are too low and we're not seeing what students are actually capable of and not giving them a chance to exceed when they can. So that said, that you're looking at data to help place kids, I think is great. But it seemed to me that there's a little bit of conflict there between that and what you talked about, student-centered learning. If we're focused on test scores and data to place students, how is that student-centered? Like, how much choice do students have in terms of what track they're in?
Actually, I think what is part of our equity committee, we heard from a student talking about like how the recommendation process works, and that it can be different. It can be different for students in terms of knowing even what course to take. I think to answer your concerns about the idea of, and I think part of, and this is me reflecting right now, the idea, there's curriculum written right now that is based on the core standards. So when we talk about the CP level, we have an honors curriculum in English and social studies, and we have an on-level curriculum. But in teaching that on-level curriculum, we break it into a CP level and a GP level. And again, I think when these changes have been made, I was part of a district that made this change in 2004. Mrs. Garriel was part of a district that made this change in 2006. When those changes are made, again, I think the idea is also, I think it's notable that when we're looking at these districts, well, actually, one of mine wasn't diverse, but there is also like a diversity component here of looking at acknowledging that and making sure that everyone has quality core instruction, whether or not they know in 9th grade or 10th grade that they're college prep bound and or general prep, if that's the idea behind general prep is career orientation. So I think that's one of the pieces that we even saw in the research is like, and as they come from 8th grade, they're on this playing field. And when we talk about placement, we are talking about placement in tier 2 or tier 3. So that is in addition, unless it is, as Dr. Murphy mentioned, like a replacement curriculum is more appropriate than the access to the core curriculum that we're offering. And an IEP team typically makes that decision. Again, it's really hard for me to go into the specifics, and I don't want to stray into my Director of Special Education's territory, but I'd be happy to answer any questions, and if those are supplied to Dr. Campbell around inclusion and our special ed program.
Well, it does seem like a lot of the reason for this change is inclusion, and I think what Mrs. Bowen was saying, and one of the things that I'd be concerned about is that if we're trying to move towards inclusion, but then we're accidentally creating a situation of exclusion where kids can't get out of their special ed classroom, I mean, that concerns me. I want to make sure that as much as possible we can move towards the actual goal and not create a structure where it makes it even harder for those kids to be included.
And I fully appreciate that. I have a past teaching experience in school that did full inclusion, which was eliminating pull-out and fully included kids. And one of the, again, there's always a balance and lever system of, are you meeting the educational needs of that student, preparing them for what is next steps? And so I really would like to collate questions about the program and then come back to the board with those answers.
Okay, thank you. And then I think my last question was about professional development. So you're going to have teachers who have taught college prep or on level in the past. And now, next year, they will have kids, a different assortment of kids than they're used to. What kind of professional development is what I meant to say.
Sure.
Will they need to succeed in that atmosphere? And what are we offering?
So I mentioned some of those things. One of the things that we have right now that's extraordinary that I don't know we're going to hold on to is the number of blocks that we're able to provide instructional coaching to teachers. We haven't had that before, and so I have two individuals. One is only half-time. But again, if this makes sense to you, I can provide all the PD. I'm going to use an analogy of learning to ski, right? So I can watch videos, we can read books about learning to ski, but at some point I have to get on the slopes, and it helps me to see somebody else do the hard part or talk me through it at least. So if we could, again, the coaches are they're new this year in those positions, but what I'd like to see is by January, teachers engaging with those coaches, if this change is coming, to talk, work with them and work through the planning stages, the delivery stages, and have some coaching and feedback. That is an extraordinary thing that we have now. One of the positions is a contract position, and so we'll be able to sustain at least one position after the ESSER funding runs out.
Okay. So this doesn't look like professional development typically looks, where there's it happens on the in-service days, or someone goes to a conference and they take extra classes outside of school time. Like, this is during the school day in very small groups, or even one-on-one with a coach?
One-on-one.
Okay.
One-on-one.
And when during the school day do they do it?
The teacher that would be up to the teacher.
Okay.
So the teacher can invite the instructional coach in for the planning stages, the delivery stages. They can invite them in to observe first and just provide feedback.
Okay.
We have, again, the administrators are making an extraordinary effort to get into classrooms and to, do walkthroughs and also provide feedback. But when you talk about the PD that we've already done, when the science department, when we collaborated, and this is going way back, probably like 2015, North Penn at the time had 90% proficiency and on their Keystone. So I can say that for them, and that was a notable thing that they started to share, and actually through the state started to share what it was, like what was in the secret sauce to get to that with so many students. And it was teacher collaboration was a huge driver of that. The teachers were working in professional learning communities. They did have common assessments, and they were analyzing those common assessments. And so the science chair actually came here to East Penn to talk to the chairs about this culture of collaboration and the things that you can do around the common assessments. And I had mentioned that in the presentation, because it's sort of chunking up the instructional units into pieces that, again, people will talk about, like, how did you teach this concept? How did I teach it? Here's how the kids did on that. And then they may even go back and try what their colleague did. Those are the kinds of things, again, when you talk about increasing the performance of the core, in core instruction, those are huge contributors. And one of the interesting things that North Penn shared with us, and I think this is notable, is sometimes when we have lower expectations, our assessments, they had shared with us that the assessment that they were giving their lowest track, and they were, at that point, they still had 3, like they had an honors, a CP level, they were numbered. But what they did was give an honors assessment to the track that was considered to be the lowest track. And they said that the students in that track did better on the honors assessment than the assessment that was designed for them, because it tended to be more skill-based and more challenging necessarily than some of the more rote pieces that were on the original assessment. And that was a takeaway shared with us, again, by a district who was committed to that work.
Okay. I guess I guess I'll ask this question. So, I used to teach people to read. So these are people who went through high school, somehow got a degree, and still couldn't read. And this was years ago, and hopefully these things don't happen as much now as they did then. But I think of how hard it is for someone who's struggling with basic, what does the word mean? And then they're in an English class that's asking them to read something like The Scarlet Letter, which is a struggle for everybody because the language is so opaque. And maybe we don't do that book anymore for that reason, I don't know. I mean, my son had to read it, and we laughed, read the sentences out loud, and neither one of us could figure them out, so I wasn't much help. But I think that is my fear, is that, and I know you're doing the labs, and that's helpful, but I just want to make sure that we're looking at the diagnosing the right thing, that we're not pushing kids to do something that they can't do because they don't have the basic skill. And I would say the same thing is with math, when you mentioned taking algebra over and over again. But what if the problem is math facts, and that's what they really need? And I'm not saying that's for every student, but just taking the same class over and over again may not, and I know you mentioned like that we're moving away from that, but I also think we need to look at what is the deficit, like what did the student miss, or what are they struggling with, and give them that, even if it's not what that class is for their grade, if that makes sense.
I'm trying to answer your question. So again, I think the research that we are considering when we look at a systems changes, again, the extra time in addition to at least the on-level challenge for the students in the school district. And so it could be a research-based intervention with 4 or 5 students if that's the level of what they need. It could be just the ELA lab, and that's going to depend on the data that we're collecting on the student. And that's also something different this year, is being able to have those 3 points of data in addition to the state testing, in addition to the PVOS measures that we have on students. I think what was concerning is simply the fact that we went into the targeted improvement before COVID, and now we recognize we have greater needs. And so when I'm articulating this as a systems change, I'm talking about it like now we're dealing with post-pandemic numbers. Some of these pieces might not stick. Like it might just be the extra boost of I was home and remote and was not tuned in. And I've shared with the board truancy numbers. And so those things have had an impact on student learning, and ultimately we want to be able to catch those students up, not necessarily identify students if that's not what's contributing to what we see right now.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bowman. Mr. Jankowski.
I had asked a similar question last meeting about the math course changes. Are there going to be interim, I mean, this is a big change if this goes through. Are there interim milestone targets that we're going to be tracking to make sure that this is effective?
So we'd definitely be looking at course failures, number one, and making sure that students who are put into the on-level, like the core instruction, are not having a lack of success. And is the lab working for the students that we've identified that have the needs to support them in the core? 2, again, because of the Keystone literature, especially like our focus right now is, again, 9th and 10th grade, really making sure that we're trying to address any deficit skills before the kids take that Keystone at the end of the 10th grade year. And then I think some of the other pieces would be the data pieces that I shared with you along with biology, like what does the growth look like? Are we seeing growth in students in the track? So there's some immediate ways to start to look at that after the change. I think our fear was if we changed nothing, it would, from this point in time, it would be 22 months, like if we changed it in the next year's POS, it would be 22 months before we were able to do that. And then there is the other pieces of disproportion. So there's a couple different things feeding into this discussion.
And will there be methods of assessment to determine, if we're not hitting targets or we're just hitting targets, but we're not trending in the right direction, what the root cause is, and are we going to have or be prepared to address those root causes in the appropriate way?
So that's hard. It's hard for me to answer that because in science, when we made the change, and again, I have to compliment all of the science teachers in the Emmaus High School Science Department. When we made that change, not only were we changing and eliminating the track that was considered below college prep, but we also, all of the teachers had to teach a new course while we flipped the grade band and we moved biology to 10th grade for some of the teachers. So that was, we added a whole other layer of stress onto our science department, and we didn't see an implementation dip per se. I don't know what it would look like in ELA and social studies, and biology keystone is typically when we come forward next week with demographically like data, biology is typically the lower keystone of most high schools. So we made that change without, I'd say, significant drop. But typically, we're told as educators, you expect an implementation dip when you make a change. So I would look for, at the 3-year mark, being able to move from what we've done to pushing kids into advanced opportunities.
All right. And then just lastly, I want to echo again, I think Mrs. Bowen raised some very, very important questions, and I do hope that you will have answers for the board to help us evaluate this, because I think, it is concerning that, while the intent is there, that we have a cohort of students that are left behind or lost, and I hope that's not an outcome that we're going to have to live with.
Totally understand, and again, we'll get answers from Dr. Pekarik and get a better understanding.
Mr. Smith?
Yes, thank you. Throughout the night tonight, we've heard some pretty poignant lived experience that many of us here, part of this conversation, don't have experience with. So it's important that I think we do listen and consider to some of those messages that were shared throughout the night tonight. Ms. Bowen's comments, certainly the most recent and certainly most germane to the conversation at hand, I think. When I think about kind of some of the structural changes, systematic changes that we're looking at implementing, I'm trying to, I've had a bunch of thoughts bouncing around my head as I'm listening to the discussion tonight, so my apologies if they kind of come all out at once. When I think about where we are right now and the way that it's not working, like earlier tonight, we've heard several from community members, some of whom are here tonight, we've heard several reminders about the math data. Well, earlier tonight we approved new math curriculum in the hopes that we would address some of that. I think we're seeing also currently some data that doesn't reflect what we envision our ELA and social studies curriculum to be at the high school level. So what we have now doesn't seem to be meeting the needs of our students to the best that we would hope. In addition to that, we're seeing changes made elsewhere years and years and years ago, 10, 15 years ago in some cases, that we are just talking about tonight. So there's plenty of places that have made some of these changes that have been made and are doing well. And I think, what I appreciate is that we're willing to take a look at some of those and see what would fit our students here. But we can't do that at the cost of ignoring some of those lived experiences that we heard tonight. So I think about what we currently have in place and kind of where we want to go. And I don't know, I'm a visual learner, so I like to try to paint a picture for myself and metaphors and analogies and things like that. I feel like having the 5-track system right now is, 5 lanes of a highway, but we've got guardrails set up, and that's your lane. You're in that lane, you stay there. I think what would serve us as a district best would be develop. I think this is kind of where we're headed. So I'm optimistic there, but would be develop something where we still have our guardrails for our kids that that need that guidance, that need that direction, but have on and off ramps to be able to hop into some of those other tracks and be shown opportunities for what possibilities might be out there for them, so that they're not locked into a channel and can't get out of that channel. We've heard comments in the past about the two of the biggest effect sizes that impact students' achievements and ability to grow, being one, very top, by far, the collective teacher efficacy of the entire district and the teaching population. And two, those same teachers' beliefs in positive student outcomes. And I think we've heard some comments tonight about PD and what that looks like and the options that are available to our teachers. We're not going to hit either one of those two things if we don't put in the work to identify and say, this is what teachers need in order to be able to best affect this particular outcome, whatever that outcome might be. So sure, there might be some choice, there might be some opportunity to go out and get that coaching that they might need in that targeted specific area, but there are certain non-negotiables, I'll use that word, that we need to identify what those are and make sure that we have those in place for our teachers and have the PD in place to be able to give that to them, to build that collective efficacy, and to be able to build in those on and off ramps in this that show students that you might be in this particular track right now with these particular guardrails that we've set up for you, but there are these other options that are available to you to be able to show students that, hey, we have an ability to, or you have the ability to do these positive things and see these kinds of things in yourself, and talk, and not so much so that they get so, anxious and feeling all this pressure to be able to take 4 AP courses, but to just say, hey, you know what? The CP class, that's something I never thought I could do. And I think that's what we're doing here, but I don't want to do that at the expense of some of the comments that Mrs. Bowen was saying earlier. We don't want to do that at the expense of ending up making bigger walls that our kids can't get past and get stuck in that particular lane. So there's a little bit of a balance. We heard about the scales, I think, from some of my colleagues tonight. That balance is going to have to be key here. I think we've got a lot of good things in place and a lot of good vision of where we want to go, but we have some considerations, I think, that need to be made as well. So not really a question in there, just some general feedback, because I do really appreciate, obviously, the scope and the depth and the breadth of the presentation here tonight and the work that you've done as a team. I just want to make sure we're keeping that as other pieces in the back of our minds as we go forward.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Champagne?
Yes, thank you. Can you help me understand, you talk about the science change that was made several years ago, and it seems from the data that you presented that it has been working. It has moved students to higher levels of achievement and growth. And I assume that the population of students, encompasses all of the kids that, may have IEPs or, other issues. And yet I'm struggling in how you managed to make that work and address Mrs. Bowen's questions. Can you explain? Maybe you did, but I just missed it. And I'd like to understand further how it works in that setting and how it addresses her concerns.
So again, and I don't want to misspeak on the programs that we have in our K-12 system. So that's when I asked the question again about middle level. I understand that I will have to follow up with you. When we talk about the changes that we made in biology, there are still students who are identified who might not be in the co-taught sections of biology that we offer with the on-level biology. And again, it would be based on an IEP team decision where if that student was getting what we would call a replacement curriculum for biology instead of being in that class. I can get you numbers on how many students that is, and I can get certainly more data. I just don't feel in a position tonight to be able to sort of wing that answer at the microphone. I think our goal is typically what we do right now is we in GP offer 5 sections, and then we increase the number of students in the room who have an IEP, and then we might also have students who are there because they don't want to be engaged in college prep. And I want to be really clear too that I'm not up here saying this is a teacher efficacy issue. More so, I wondered when I watched this change happen at Emmaus High School if it was a systems issue as well, because I have teachers who, when we when we had biology in 3 tracks, were showing a lack of growth with their GP sections, who that when we dissolved it are now, they're teachers who are bright blue for me. So there might be something there also, and we've done this work at other levels in terms of like the heterogeneous mix, sort of, again, bringing in a challenging curriculum, bringing up performance. I know that there are so many ways you can't like say that this is the thing that increased the academic performance, but I just want to be clear that, so we saw other districts that have done this work have followed, again, the research that says that detracking can assist students to increase academic performance. What we didn't want to do, or what I did in science, honestly, I detracked science in 9th and 10th grade, but there was no extra support. I think that's the intent behind the idea of the ELA support right now, because again, this is looking at like post-pandemic data right now.
But in either scenario, whether you maintain the current GP structure or you move to eliminating that track and what you did in biology, there's always going to be a segment of the student population that is not going to be in the co-taught environment.
That's
Is
correct.
that an accurate statement?
No, that's accurate.
And there's not much we can change because of their disabilities that they could be. So it's not that we're not, and I'm trying to think how to say this. We are inclusive, but we recognize there are just certain things that we can't co-teach, or students can't be in that. Is that accurate to?
It depends on the philosophy of the district. I had mentioned I was in a fully included school that actually had what we would consider to be students in a self-contained class. I had everybody, because the philosophy at that district at the time, and this would have been 2011, was to go from full inclusion. That district moved away from that after I left that district because of, again, I think a philosophical shift. I would like to be able to come back, and I hear the special education pieces to this. I'm referring right now to the students who, through our course placement currently, go into either our honors, CP, or GP. I do think there's a much bigger special education conversation that is part of this total systems change that we're talking about. I believe right now that, in special ed, it is very difficult with the case management and some of the demands that we're placing on our special education teachers, that we have to step back and look at what it is we're asking them to do and the supports that they're trying to give. We also want to look at the performance of things like co-teaching. Is that resulting in increased achievement in the co-taught sections?
So if we look at some of the peers that you brought up, how are they handled the questions that Ms. Bowen brought up?
And I can bring you back information on that,
Because
not being a special
Yeah,
educator.
I mean, I don't know what they have done. They've made this change, so they had to have addressed her issues in some form, I would assume.
I'm not saying that.
And so, all right. And then going to the middle school level, I mean, obviously, there's only 2 tracks there. There's on level and there's advanced, or however you characterize it. So I guess I'm of a proponent that you challenge kids. The more you challenge them, you're going to find that more times than not, they're going to rise to the occasion. So I guess I'm supportive of this change, not because I want to exclude anyone, but I think giving kids a challenge and putting them in a position of where their outcomes and their peers are challenged as well, can make a difference. So I guess, how is the 8th grade or the middle school curriculum supporting this kind of change? Do we need to make changes there as well to ensure that those kids are not coming in with deficits that they're already behind? Because now we're asking them to step up to the next level.
I'm just going to go, and I know that Mr. Mahawk's here, but maybe he wants to stay seated. I think the math curriculum is something that we want to keep being attentive to, math achievement. I think when we were in remote instruction, we saw, through the adoption of the core resources that we had K-8, we wanted to see improvement. We adopted that right before the pandemic, and then we're going to have a bigger conversation about the achievement in math next week. So I think to answer that question, if I say right now that the priorities in the district are math and reading, Dr. Murphy can speak more to the reading data that's going to be shared, but I think also it's beefing up. We want to see more advanced achievement. We want to see more national merit finalists here. And so it's beefing up our honors classes, but there's like a part one that I think we have to focus our attention to, and then a part two to this work.
Thank you. Mr. Byrd.
Yes, first of all, appreciate the presentation tonight. I guess I've listened to all my colleagues talk about some things. I was kind of torn as I read this information, and I just feel that it's a great move to get a challenge our students, I think. And then on the other end, listen to the other students who can't do that, like IEP students and our special ed students. I'm kind of torn between the two of them, and that's where I'm really have a concern. Piggybacking on what Mrs. Bowman said and talked about, that's really a concern. As we move to this program, how do we address that? I don't think you have the answers tonight. I hope we get those answers, but that's really a struggle for me, that we push those kids to the side and we don't get the inclusion and equity that we're talking about we have a vision for. Also, one thing you talked about professional development. As the teachers get into this program and they have to choose what professional development, I think we have to direct what professional development that you want them to take to make sure that you are positive. One of the things that I think, if I look at this program, that what you might want to do, and I thought about it a little bit, is there's some implied bias in teachers. There have to be. We're all human. So how do you fix that? Professional development, special education kids with autism. How do we address that?
Well, so I wanted to address your first question first, maybe, regarding the professional development, because it was mentioned by another member of the board as well. So I just wanted to clarify this. So while the teachers are choosing a professional learning pathway that really just makes up a portion of their professional development for the year, there is other required professional development specifically about inclusive practices, inclusive teaching. In particular at the high school, they're working more on SEL. So there is some other required professional development. We just gave them a portion of their professional development time for the year that was choice. So I just wanted to make sure I clarified that. And then regarding your question with addressing bias, we have engaged in professional development now for we started last year. We have a new presenter that's been working with us this year. So that's really just something that's going to require ongoing time and attention. I think that anyone on the board could probably tell you that that's not the kind of thing that you can just do one time and move on and, check that box. So we just have committed to ongoing professional development related to culturally relevant practices and identifying bias and again, just making sure all students feel included. Our conversation about inclusion, we ended up talking a lot about special ed, but I think it's important that the word inclusion really means inclusion for all students regardless of their race, their ethnicity, their socioeconomic background, and their IEP status. But I just wanted to make sure we didn't lose sight of all the other subgroups that we serve in this conversation. So,
One more question. What is the end game? What do you hope to achieve at the end? I think you talked a little bit about it. Improve growth and improve scores of proficiency in Keystone and other standard tests.
Yeah. Proficiency in the Keystone is one piece. Just again with Act 158, it's easier for our students, but also the screener data that we're looking at the screener data and seeing a market improvement based on the students' engagement in some of these tier 2 and tier 3 supports, success in the core curriculum, students attempting more challenging curriculum, not forcing them into the more challenging curriculum, but students doing that. So I will tell you, when we made this change in science, I had more students who opt for honors bio once the change was made to put all of the students into an on-level biology. And so that was an unintended consequence or an intended consequence of making that change, as you saw honors enrollment go up.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Go ahead. Yeah, I would just say, I think, if I was to flip back to some of our slides with our students' faces on them, The other outcome I would hope for is that we start to see more natural proportions in all of our courses. I think right now, you could almost predict based on the student's race what track they might be in our school. And that is an ethical dilemma for us, for sure. And I think that, I will transition back and talk a little bit about IEPs again. The state sets a pretty clear precedent that the percentage of students with IEPs in a course shouldn't exceed 10% over your overall building average. So right now, we have a building average of 16%, but our GP classes currently have 46, somewhere between 45 and 50% students with IEPs. So again, I think that we're successful when all of our levels, and I understand that looking at the advanced courses and getting kids to advance is maybe our next step, but when our levels of courses, when our course offerings and the way kids take courses, shakes out more like our overall building, I think that's when we'll know we'll be successful too.
One last question. You talked about different students and different backgrounds. How do you plan to get all the students feel like they belong? The kids that have IEP, special ed kids, how they belong in the class. I think belonging creates a better academic environment for the student.
I really like that question, and I also like how that question connects to course placement and registration too. So one of the things that Mrs. Garriello put in place this year at our high school is a Hornet homeroom that has multiple grade levels in it. So first and foremost, what I hope comes out of that is this concept where the older students begin nurturing and helping develop the younger students that are in that Hornet homeroom with them. That was actually something that came out of our student advisory committee. The students that were on the committee told us, we want to be involved in helping younger students get acclimated to Emmaus High School. We think that we can do a better job of supporting them. So the fact that Mrs. Garriello put that system in place, one, I think it's going to help kids feel more connected because those are kids that they get to see every day in a non-academic setting. And two, I think it's also going to help in the long run with some of our course placement because now kids are going to get to hear from other kids how the courses work, rather than just relying on a counselor or a video that they might have had to watch about a course. So I like that question for two reasons.
Thank you. That's all I have. Thank you very much.
Mr. Whitney, or Dr. Whitney?
Just a couple quick questions. A lot of my questions and concerns have already been aired, and I don't want to go back over them, except say that I agree with much of the concerns here, and I also agree with that this is in the main a good change, a positive change. But so one question I have, going back to the instructional coaching, the one-on-one instructional coaching, you're saying you have 1.5 essentially instructional coaches.
Yes.
How in the world are they going to accommodate one-on-one coaching with all of the teachers in the high school, or all of the teachers even in these two departments?
50 English and social studies, yeah. Yeah, so I have about 50 teachers. I mean, again, there would have to be, and Erin has strong feelings about this, so I'm not going to let her near the microphone right now. But basically, in instructional coaching, again, you don't typically assign someone for instructional coaching. It's an invitation into the classroom to be part of the process, to first be observed or whatever, if you want to start with planning. So again, I think the priority would be given if we're moving forward with this, making sure that we're reaching out to the English and social studies teachers at the high school to offer services, offer examples of UDL in action, like some things that could actually be made in collaborative groups in the English and social studies within their departments, aligned to, again, their core curriculum. So when you talk about common assessments, you are essentially, developing what are the outcomes that you want and how are you going to measure them. And I think that's what we envision when we talk about developing additional common assessments in addition to the midterm and final. What it's also going to do, and now we're getting into the weeds, but it's also going to help drive pacing so that when there are special educators who are trying to help kids who are involved in these courses, it's a little more uniform than what we what we have right now. So we look at like modification of curriculum or modification of assessment. That's where that becomes easier for the special educator. I again think one of the other drivers, and so special education definitely came up tonight, but one of the other drivers is making the role of the special educator at the high school more manageable, in addition to the caseloads that they manage and their role in supporting students in content areas.
And then I have a question about the Hornet homeroom, which I should probably know the answer to, but are those fully integrated in terms of special ed and regular education students?
Yes, they are.
So those are examples where we have, I know non-academic setting, obviously.
It
but
is it's 9th through
non-curricular.
12th grade combined. It's actually assigned by last name so that when counselors want to go in and talk to groups of students, they're already grouped by counselor and by assistant principal. There are a few students who, for perhaps medical reasons, will leave and go to a different teacher. But when I say a few, I mean maybe 5 or 6 out of 2,800 kids. So it is fully included.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
That's all my question.
Thank you, Dr. Whitney. Ms. Bowman?
Yeah, just a follow-up question that I forgot to ask. Is the reason that you're doing this all at once because of the potential loss of the instructional coaches? For example, not phasing it in maybe by doing English first and social studies second, or even phasing it in more slowly by doing 9th grade first and then 10th or whatever. What is the thought process behind like totally ripping off the Band-Aid and going full all in next year?
So some of the things are interrelated, and so I'm glad you asked that question. So I talked about some of the special education pieces, but in order to change their roles, if I maintain 25 sessions in the high school that are teaching English and social studies, and we have over 50% of IEP students in there, again, I think the level of comfort right now is that everyone has a co-teacher when they have those percentages. When we talk about now prioritizing reading and math, we may be redesign, and then seeing students make growth who have IEPs in reading and math. We may redesign the special educator's role, one, so that it's more manageable for them and that they have the time to do, for instance, in English language arts, the time in the lab to do the modification that they might not have had time to do to make that IEP student successful on the on-level curriculum. Okay. So that's one piece. Okay. I'm missing other pieces right now based on your question. Well, financially, yes, sir, so let me go there. So right now, we absolutely have the most resources we are going to have, and that will be true. We're hoping to extend as much as we can through the following year. But when we're looking at this as a systems change, we are pretending and planning as though some of these positions are not a guarantee. Knowing, and that's been one of the drivers, and we didn't talk about that tonight, but knowing that we have these supports in place, but some of them may not be sustainable. One is we want to attack the problem as quickly as possible to hopefully get as many kids back up onto level again or successful. But it's also the recognition of I have X number of special educators, I have X number of teachers. We restored 2 contracts at the high school last year, and so it's how can we look at making use of what we have.
So this leads to, I'm sorry, I will ask a follow-up then. One of my frustrations on the board that I see I've actually become quite used to it is that everything moves so slowly in education. I think we first talked about changing the start time at the high school 5 years ago, and we're still studying it, for example. To me, this feels very fast. Mm-hmm. Could you tell me, does it feel fast to you? Maybe this is something that you all have been working on for a long time, so it doesn't, or if it is a lot faster than we usually do, what gives you so much confidence that it's the right direction to go?
All the multi-part questions after 10 p.m. Okay, I'm trying to remember them.
Fast?
So yeah.
Is it fast?
It's fast. It's fast because the sense of urgency is the data that we have, the resources that we have, and that we'll have through. I mean, potentially, what we'd like to try to do is at least extend it through next year. We'd have to see if what could be extended through the following year. Again, I think special education, we have to have larger conversations about special education. I think that's also the purpose of the group that is, that includes our some of our chairs from the high school in the group that's going for the systems benchmarking. I mean, one of the things is, as you pointed out, I'm talking about things that I've experienced in the past, and we need to keep an eye on the future and make sure that what it is that we're moving towards has a research backing. In this instance, about the conversation at the high school level with providing students with extra time, I've worked in the environment that we're moving towards, but two, I believe that is going to be the thing that provides supports for students to hopefully be successful, because it's above and beyond what we've done when we made the changes in science. And I would still count that as more difficult content than, in English and social studies, and Aaron, you might want to come up and talk about the curriculum, but it's reading to think, it's critical analysis, it's the content changes, to your instance or joke about the Scarlet Letter, or what period in time in social studies, but the skills that we're working on in English and social studies in some ways, for some feels perhaps, less difficult than mastering the biology keystone curriculum. And so, if you want to step up.
Yeah, just simply the skills spiral. So making an inference versus making an inference versus making an inference.
That makes sense. And was that also the answer to why you're confident, or did?
It turns
I
to
just wanted to
confidence
make
because
sure.
I think what happened in science, like if again, and Aaron articulated the goal of natural proportion, when you look at biology, it looks very different.
Okay.
And then, what I can't answer you why the inclusion sections don't have that disproportion, but they don't have that racial disproportion that we see in the GP sections.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay. I guess, I do have a few questions or points. So, like anything that we want to do in terms of implementation, we want to, make sure that we minimize potential issues while maximizing, the chances of success for this going on. My colleagues have asked some very substantive questions, and I share many of the same concerns, and I'm looking forward to responses to those questions. But my questions are a little more practical in terms of we're going to go forward with this, and presumably go forward with this. And I know that you've spoken with other districts and their implementation plans and how things work. What pitfalls can you identify that could make this not work as well as we want, in terms of maybe some bumps in the road? Or is there anything structural that's specific to East Penn that's in common with some of these other things you've heard that where there might be potential issues?
Well, so I think, again, me and my level of expertise, I feel like, is in curriculum instruction, and not so, I don't want to misspeak for special ed, but I'd like to have a better understanding of Mrs. Bowen's concerns and come back to the board with more information about special education. So I'll identify that as a potential pitfall, but only in the sense that right now I'm not the expert who has the microphone tonight. I think that right now, and I had shared this through board report, but right now the two core classes or graduation requirements where we are reseating the most students and experiencing the most failure is in English and social studies. And so we'd like to see a reduction of that. If I have to look at it from the lens of a reduction in the percentage of students failing, I mean, right now we're going to try two things at once next year. We're going to try that half credit recovery. But essentially, again, the more students you reseat, the higher your class size. Some of the things that, again, I think teachers care about in an implementation. And I think, the question will linger after the ESSER funds run out. Where are our students? And I think, again, that's what's driving the sense of urgency. If we don't change the program of studies, or we push it off, I would like to be able to share with the board the demographically alike data comparison next week, and potentially, discuss that in this lens as well, because I think that's important for everyone to understand where this is coming from and why this is occurring at this timing.
Okay. All right, thank you. And my final question is, so again, presuming we're moving forward with this, what needs to happen over the next 10 months in terms of steps and milestones and details that have to occur? Who are the stakeholders that are going to be involved to help make this work? And, again, how are we going to position ourselves so that we can launch this successfully?
So my colleagues in the room and those of you who have worked on a committee with me will know that I have a very extensive spreadsheet that sort of outlines all the additional steps that need to take place between now and I would say even by the end of the school year, not necessarily the fall. But in summary, I would say that there's professional development steps. There are curricular material steps. So we talked about common assessments, pacing guides, and those two things are maybe the most core function. But then interrelated to that is also the process and the programming for getting kids into our newly aligned courses. Like, what does that process look like? How do we ensure the correct placement for students in the remaining tracks? So those are all things that Ms. Gariello and I have already started gaming out. So I guess in summary, those are sort of the buckets, right? So the professional development, the curriculum materials, and then the new processes that need to be in place to ensure that we don't recreate another problematic system.
So input's going to be received, I guess, from all stakeholders.
I'm sorry, that was the other part of your question. I apologize. I'll also blame the fact that it's after 10 o'clock, if I may. But yes, this decision, as we discussed, was made with urgency, but the rest of this work absolutely must be done with other stakeholder groups. We already have student advisory teams that we work with, the teachers, teaching teams, in particular, our department chairs. I think that we've learned a lot about ensuring that we have family members that are involved in the process as well. So yes, all stakeholder groups.
Okay. So I guess, in essence, for lack of a better term, buy-in is going to be important across everybody who's going to be involved, and obviously then provide or help to foster confidence that this is going to be something that will work. Okay. All right. Yes, it is after 10 o'clock. You've been up there for quite some time. Any other questions or concerns the board would like to bring up? Thank you very much for hanging in there and providing lots of valuable information for us to consider. All right, moving on. Our next item on the agenda is policy. We have a third reading and adoption of the policies. I don't believe that there were any edits or updates that were done from the second reading. If there is no additional feedback, I'd like to move forward with a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Any additional questions or comments? Seeing none, Ms. Allen, will you please call the roll?
Dr. Whitney?
Aye.
Mrs. Bowen?
Aye.
Ms. Bowman?
Aye.
Mr. Byrd?
Aye.
Mr. Champagne?
Aye.
Mr. Falegi?
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Dr. Levinson?
Aye.
9 ayes.
Thank you. Other educational entities, I believe we have a member report from Dr. Whitney on the CLIU.
Yes, thank you. I'll keep 30 minutes or less. That joke's never going to get old. The Carbon-Lehigh Intermediate Unit Board of Directors met on October 17th, last Monday. Unfortunately, I was not in attendance at that meeting. I had a professional conflict, so this report will be relatively brief. But the big news, I would say, coming out of the IU is that Dr. Elaine Ibe, who has been the executive director of the intermediate unit for the last 13 years, has announced her retirement and going to leave some incredibly big shoes to fill in terms of the leadership of the IU, which she's done a really wonderful job, and not least because she has paid a lot of attention to keeping their budget very sound and keeping district costs as low as possible and avoiding unnecessary increases in district costs. So that's certainly something that I hope her successor will carry on. Her retirement date is not until August 11th of 2023, so there's lots of time, and of course, she announced it now in an effort to give us plenty of time as the board to identify her successor, and she has pledged to be part of that process as much as she can be to make sure that her successor is onboarded very successfully. So that's, again, going to be, we have our work cut out for us, I think, in replacing her. So that came out of the last meeting. And just a couple of other very quick things. There was a presentation from a couple of the staff members who had started the Esports League, which I mention here because Emmaus has had teams in that league. They started it in January 2021 during the pandemic, and it's really absolutely taken off. And more importantly, they've now have some data to show that students that are participating from across all the districts that are participating in these esports leagues, the student attendance has gone up, the GPAs have gone up. There's a number of positive benefits that have come from them organizing this league. And they're currently, there's 8 participating districts with 14 teams, and they're looking about a year from now, they're looking at that being 20 plus districts and maybe even 40 plus teams. And they have an entire league. Emmaus's team did win the first league championship in 2021. Unfortunately, we were unseated by Parkland this past year, but I'm sure we'll remedy that next year. And so it was a very successful endeavor, and really applaud the work that those staff members have done to pull that league up from ground zero. And then finally, the Carbon Lehigh Special Needs Children's Foundation, which is many of you know, is the entity that provides a number of great supports and programs, including the Adaptive Bikes program and many others to students in the intermediate unit. They gave a report on their fiscal 22 finances, and they were, due to donations being up, they're $30,000 ahead for fiscal 22, which gives them a great deal of latitude to expand their programming and their support of students and families in the district. So that was very good news as well. And that is my report.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Whitney. Any questions or comments from the board? Ms. Bowman.
A couple comments. I'm really happy to hear about the Esports League and all of the positive benefits of it. It's really kind of a brilliant idea that someone had, I don't know what group of people, but that it got kids interested in school, and I know we obviously need more where that came from. And then, you know, it's very sad to hear about Dr. Ibe. Obviously, people are allowed to retire at some point in life, but man, she was a great executive director there, and you're right, it's going to be hard to find someone else to fill those shoes.
Thank you, Ms. Bowman. Any other comments or questions? Again, thank you for your report. There are no other items. There are a couple announcements. First is we had an executive session this evening where we talked about personnel and confidential matters. Our next regular board meeting will be Monday, November 14th, so that's in 3 weeks. With that, I'd like to take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any objections? Meeting adjourned. Thank you very much.